I never thought my life would turn into something that people would one day listen to as a cheating wife story. But here I am, telling you about the betrayal and heartbreak that shook me to my core. My name is Daniel, I'm 34 years old, and for the longest time, I believed I was living the dream, a loving wife, a stable career, and a beautiful home we built together over 7 years of marriage. But dreams have a cruel way of turning into nightmares, especially when trust shatters. Before I tell you how I made my wife famous for all the wrong reasons, let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand the revenge on a cheating spouse, you first need to understand the love, the sacrifices, and the blind loyalty that got crushed under the weight of lies. When I first met Emily, she was 23, fresh out of college, working as a graphic designer at a small agency. I was already working as a project manager in a construction company, saving money, thinking about the future. She had this light about her, full of life, always laughing at the smallest things. She'd call me Mr. Serious, because I was always the guy who made lists and thought 3 steps ahead. She was my opposite, but that's what pulled me in. We balanced each other. Our dating years were full of late-night drives, cheap pizza, and promises whispered under the stars. I still remember her saying, "Daniel, no matter where life takes us, I'll always be on your side." And I believed her. God, I really believed her. Fast forward 2 years, we got married. It was simple, family, close friends, nothing extravagant. But in my eyes it was perfect. I wasn't marrying for the event, I was marrying for the woman standing in front of me, vowing to love me. And for 7 years I thought we were building something unshakable. But betrayal doesn't come knocking loudly at your door. It slips in quietly, hiding behind routine smiles and casual excuses. I didn't know my wife's late-night work calls weren't really work. I didn't know her sudden obsession with fitness and girls' night outs weren't about self-care. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. But love blinds you, doesn't it? When you believe in someone so deeply, your brain refuses to connect the dots. It started small. She became distant. Not in an obvious, "we're fighting all the time" kind of way. More like, her laughter didn't reach her eyes anymore when we were together. Our conversations became shorter. She was glued to her phone, always typing, always smiling at something that wasn't me. At night, she'd roll over, say she was tired, and go straight to sleep. And I, like an idiot, thought it was just stress. But then, one night changed everything. It was a Thursday, and I came home earlier than usual. Work had been cut short due to a power outage at the site. I wanted to surprise Emily, maybe take her out for dinner. I remember walking into the house and hearing her voice. At first, I thought she was on a Zoom call with a client. But the way she was speaking, soft, playful, almost flirtatious, froze me in place. "You make me feel alive," she whispered, her back turned, phone pressed to her ear. She giggled in a way I hadn't heard in months. And then she said something that shattered me. "Don't worry, he'll never know." I don't remember breathing. I don't remember how long I stood there, every muscle in my body screaming to confront her. But I didn't. Instead, I quietly walked upstairs, sat on the bed, and stared at the wall for hours. My wife, the woman I built my world around, was giving her heart to someone else. Now I know some people, when they discover infidelity, they storm in, they scream, they throw things. But me? I needed proof. Because as much as I wanted to believe my ears, part of me hoped I was wrong. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, maybe I was overthinking. Denial is powerful. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of a broken marriage drama I never signed up for. That night, I waited until she fell asleep. Her phone was on the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, but my heart was already broken. I knew her password, of course I did, we never had secrets. Or at least I thought we didn't. When I unlocked it, the truth poured out like poison. There were messages. Hundreds of them. Some flirty, some explicit, some talking about me, about how boring how she felt. Stuck. The man's name was Alex. I didn't know him, but from what I read, he was a co-worker she had met 6 months ago. They had shared hotel rooms under the guise of work trips. They had secret nicknames, inside jokes, plans for weekends I thought she was spending with her friends. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, wake her up, and scream every ounce of rage inside me. But instead, I sat there in silence, scrolling through every message, every picture she had sent him, until my eyes blurred with tears. At that moment, forgiveness versus revenge in marriage wasn't just a concept, it was a storm raging inside me. Do I try to save what's broken, or do I burn everything down? That night I didn't sleep. I went to work the next morning like nothing happened, but inside, I was planning. Planning not just for confrontation, but for something bigger. Something that would make sure she never forgot what she did. And that's when the idea began to form. If she wanted excitement, if she wanted to live the secret life, fine. But I would be the one to control the story. I would make her actions public, not to humiliate myself, but to show the world who she really was. And in the process, I'd take back the power she stole from me. But before I could act, I needed more. Proof wasn't enough. I needed to know how deep it went. And so, I started watching her. Not like a crazy stalker, but like a detective in my own home. Every late-night outing, every unexplained absence, I tracked it. I even installed a small camera in our living room, not because I wanted to catch them there, but because I needed to see her expressions, her lies, her double life. And what I found out only fueled my resolve. If you're still listening, don't forget to like this video. It helps bring more people into stories like this. 2 weeks later, I finally caught her red-handed. She told me she was going to stay at her friend Rachel's place for a girls' movie night. But Rachel, bless her, had no idea she was being used as an alibi. I texted Rachel casually, asking if Emily had reached safely. She replied, "What do you mean? I haven't seen her in weeks." My stomach dropped, but at the same time, I felt a strange calmness. The pieces were falling into place. I drove around, following the location I had secretly synced from her phone. And there she was, at a fancy restaurant downtown, sitting across from Alex, holding his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. They laughed, they leaned in close, she touched his face in that gentle way she used to touch mine. I sat in my car, engine off, watching through the window. My chest hurt so badly I thought I'd pass out. But instead of confronting them right there, I took pictures. Dozens of them. Her smile, his hand on her waist, their lips meeting under the dim lights of that restaurant. Proof. Evidence. Fuel for what was coming. Driving home that night, I knew my life was no longer the same. My marriage was a corpse, and I was walking through the ruins. But what Emily didn't know, what Alex didn't know, was that I wasn't going to let this end like every other real-life cheating story. No, I was going to write my own ending. And it would be one the world wouldn't forget. Comment below, what would you do if you were in my place? Would you confront her immediately, or wait and plan revenge? I picked up where I left off like a man walking on a tightrope with a storm coming up behind him. The evidence was there, the messages, the photos, the restaurant pictures, but evidence without a plan is just noise. For weeks after I caught them, I felt like a ghost in my own life, seeing the places we used to go and imagining her there with him. I'd drive by our favorite coffee shop and remember the first time she laughed so loud the barista gave us free croissants. I'd pass the park where we talked about kids and mortgages and feel like every memory had been borrowed and spent. But grief made way for something else, clarity. Maybe it was the steadiness that comes when you decide you won't be a passive character in someone else's story. Maybe it was the fact that my anger, once a hot ember, had become methodical. I needed a plan that matched what I'd lost, a plan that reclaimed my voice and my dignity. Revenge on cheating spouse is a phrase people throw around, but in truth, there's a fine line between justice and cruelty. I told myself I didn't want to be cruel. I wanted truth. I wanted accountability. I wanted the world to see the person I loved for who she'd chosen to be. The first steps were simple, almost clinical. I copied messages, saved timestamps, backed up photos to hard drives. I printed the restaurant photos, the tiny gestures, the way they held hands, the way she turned her face into his like it belonged there. I made a folder labeled Emily_Alex. And every time I added something, it felt like I was stitching a wound closed. I wasn't yet sure whether to go public. Part of me wanted to confront her privately, to make her hear my voice break and maybe, just maybe, find a sliver of regret in her eyes. Another part of me wanted the world to know so that she couldn't pretend nothing happened. Late one night, as rain tapped the windows and the house smelled faintly of the lavender candles she used to light on Sundays, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote. I wrote not out of vitriol but out of need, to tell the story as I'd lived it. The words poured out, and with each paragraph I could feel my chest loosen. This was the truth as I remembered it, the small kindnesses embraced so you'd overlook the empty spaces, the whispered promises that became quiet, the nights when I reached out and felt a stranger's back. I wrote about the first time I'd seen the messages, about the restaurant, about the ache. I wrote about the fear that the truth, once revealed, could destroy more than just our marriage. It could destroy family reputations, hurt people I loved. I wrote, too, about forgiveness versus revenge in marriage, the way those options dangled like two doors in a hallway I feared to walk. I saved the file as a draft. I read it aloud to an empty room and felt ridiculous, like a man rehearsing grief, but it helped. In the weeks that followed, I did more watching than acting. I became the quiet man who knew everything and said nothing. I learned Alex's routines, which cafe he favored on weekday mornings, the gym he pretended to be too busy for, the charity gala he used as an excuse to get her out of town. I learned the contours of their relationship not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I needed to know the depth of the wound. Sometimes, when the guilt became too loud, I remembered how she had looked when she told me we were out of options, that hollowed-out look like someone who had someone else's life in their pocket. In those moments, I almost gave up the plan. Almost. But then I'd think of all the quiet compromises, the small betrayals that followed, the lies about where she was, the little financial secrets she kept, the casual disregard for my feelings that piled like leaves making a dry, flammable stack. One evening, 2 months after I first heard her whisper, I decided to confront her. The confrontation in my head had been cinematic, dramatic glares, a slamming door, a tearful confession, perhaps, followed by apologies and a complicated path toward healing. Real life is messy. I came home with a folder in my bag and sat on the couch until she walked in, brushing rain from her hair and humming. She greeted me with a smile that used to be my favorite thing in the world. "Hey," she said. "You look tired." "I am," I lied. "We need to talk." She sat next to me, her hand finding mine like it belonged there. For a second I almost melted. The temptation to say nothing, just to hold her and pretend, was powerful. But I had fallen for that illusion before. I wanted the truth in full force. "You're avoiding my calls," she said, voice light but cautious. "Is everything okay?" I opened the folder. The photos slid across my knee like small, accusing tiles. She saw them and for an instant, less than a blink, a color left her face. I watched her, expecting the storm. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat very still and, like a practiced actor, made a face I couldn't read. "What is this?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "I've read your messages. I saw you in that restaurant. I know about Alex." Something in her expression broke then, regret, fear, maybe shame, and for a moment, the woman I loved appeared and crumpled. "Daniel," she whispered. It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's the word you use when you know you're hurting someone. You call me boring, you call me reliable in the same breath, like they're crimes. We made vows, Emily. We built a life." She looked away. "You don't understand. I was lonely. You were she stumbled. I know it sounds bad. I know it was wrong. The temptation to forgive flashed through me like a neon sign. There's a peculiar power to watching someone admit wrong. It loosens your fury. It opens a door you can step through toward reconciliation. But confession without change is theater. How long? I asked. 6 months, she said. It started at work, and then it. She put her hands over her face. Her fingers were trembling. And you told me you were going to girls' nights, I said. You told me you were working late. Was any of that true? Some of it, she said. I did go out with friends sometimes. I didn't mean for it to happen. Alex, don't, I warned. Don't try to excuse this with excuses. She didn't. But she also didn't ask for my forgiveness in a way that suggested she'd actually change. She asked for understanding, which, to me, was different. Understanding still leaves you with the full weight of the betrayal. Forgiveness removes some of that weight, but it demands effort, real change. That night, we talked until dawn. She spoke about the empty places in our marriage and I listened, partly because I wanted to be fair and partly because I needed to hear how someone else justified the chasm between us. In the light of that conversation, I learned something important. Her affair was not only about sex or excitement. It was about the slow erosion of intimacy that neither of us had kept tending. It was about small resentments that had nowhere to go. It was about ego, boredom, fear. It was an emotional relationship story with multiple actors. I left the folder on the kitchen table and told her I needed time. I told her I wasn't sure what I wanted. I remember the look on her face, relief, perhaps, or triumph, or the knowledge that she had been found out and the world now required a new script. She said she wanted to save our marriage. She promised to cut off contact with Alex. She promised transparency. She promised to go to counseling. Promises are intoxicating. They make you believe in the possibility of repair. But the evidence in my folder felt heavy. I couldn't simply walk away from it. I kept thinking about the choices, the small daily compromises that allow secrets to fester. I kept thinking about what it would do to our community and our families if no one ever spoke up about the quiet cruelties we accept. That's when the idea, dangerous, sharp, returned. If she wanted to live a life of lies, maybe the truth needed to be louder. I won't go into step-by-step tactics of humiliation because that would be petty and potentially harmful. Instead, I'll tell you the emotional architecture of what I did. I started to write my story properly, no longer a series of notes in a folder, but an articulate, public truth. I wrote it as a narrative, a confession from the person betrayed. I wrote about the small, human details, how he smelled of someone else's shampoo, how she stopped tucking her hair behind her ear when we watched TV, the way she adopted new phrases around him. I wasn't writing to ruin her. I was writing to reclaim my life and to speak to anyone who might be in the same dark. I posted the story anonymously on a forum where people share personal narratives, real-life cheating stories, packaged as confessions. I didn't post names. I didn't include private info. I only told the story as it happened, the betrayal, the evidence, my internal debate between forgiveness versus revenge in marriage. The post started small. People read, sympathized, shared. Then someone turned my anonymous post into content for a larger subreddit. Then an influencer reached out asking to feature the story. Then the comments swelled. I watched as my story, my pain, found an audience. It felt vulnerable and powerful at once. There's a strange moral complexity to this. On one hand, I was airing private grief in a public square. On the other, I was refusing to be silenced by shame. The phrase, cheating wife story, trended in my mind like a headline I hated yet couldn't ignore. People were drawn to betrayal and heartbreak as if it were a spectacle, and that both repulsed and comforted me. Repulsed because the intimacy of my marriage was being parsed by strangers. Comforted because the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. As the narrative spread, Emily's behavior changed. She withdrew from friends, grew quieter in group photos, stopped posting the curated snapshots of happiness she used to. Alex, too, became less visible. His name, though unmentioned in my posts, began to be whispered. Our small community was a pressure cooker of curiosity. I felt guilty, yes, but less alone. There's solace in being witnessed, even by strangers. One night, as the post continued to circulate, I received an anonymous message on my burner email. It contained video files, recordings of conversations between Emily and Alex that I hadn't seen, timestamps that placed them in our home at times I thought we'd been alone. The sender signed off with one word: truth. I didn't know whether to trust the source. I didn't know whether someone was playing a cruel game. But when I watched those videos, anything that remained of denial evaporated. In one clip, Emily laughed in a way she hadn't in years, and Alex laughed too, low and easy. In another, they discussed vacations together as if they were already a unit. The images were devastating and precise. I could have taken these videos to the police, to a lawyer, exposed them with a level of detail that could destroy reputations and careers. I could have anonymously leaked them to the press and watched the world consume the scandal. Instead, I made a choice that felt like the only morally defensible option. I used the videos to strengthen my own narrative, to give context to my pain, not to deliver a fatal blow. I redacted identifying details. I blurred faces. I used snippets that conveyed emotion but not the ability to ruin someone's livelihood. My point was to be seen, not to ruin lives beyond repair. The posts, the comments, the messages, they turned into a tidal wave. People reached out to share their own stories, to tell me they'd been through something similar. Others accused me of being cruel, of weaponizing pain. Those criticisms cut deep, because part of me knew the danger in exposure. But there's a difference between revenge that dehumanizes and standing up for oneself. I navigated that line clumsily and imperfectly, but with intention. As the story gained traction, the pressure within the house intensified. Emily refused to speak about the posts. We had sessions with a counselor, awkward, halting appointments where both of us sat across from a woman who had seen countless couples fall apart and occasionally find each other again. In therapy, Emily wept. She admitted her affair, its causes, and her cowardice. She said she wanted to save our marriage. She promised transparency, asked for forgiveness, and said she'd attend group sessions for couples dealing with infidelity. I listened. I wanted to believe her. There were moments in therapy where I could feel the old warmth flicker, the way her hand gripped mine when we acknowledged the hurt without flinching, the small, human acts of accountability that felt honest. But outside the walls of the counselor's office, the posts continued to circulate. People we knew, neighbors, coworkers, friends of friends, started to ask questions. Our children, if we had any, in my story, we didn't, would have been caught in the crossfire. Families took sides. The world that had once looked away now leaned in. Then came the night that changed everything. The evening a local radio host decided to do a segment on relationship betrayals and invited someone from the internet to call in. The host read my anonymous post on air as an example of betrayal and heartbreak and then, in a twist I hadn't expected, invited listeners to call in with their reactions. Within minutes, the line lit up. People sympathized. People condemned. People offered advice. It felt like the wound had been opened wider, but it also felt like justice in the sense that the truth could no longer be a whisper. Emily listened to the segment with me. This time, she cried with an openness that frightened me. She turned to me and whispered, "I didn't mean for this to go public." "No," I said. "You didn't." "I did." I saw something in her eyes then, something like recognition of how my agency had reclaimed the narrative. She was not blameless. She had made choices. But neither was I. My actions had consequences, and the public exposure of our marriage had effects beyond me. The days after the radio segment were chaotic. Some people reached out with offers of support. Others reached out with venom. Alex messaged her once, a desperate plea that somehow he still loved her. She replied with coldness, telling him to stop. He sent another message begging for a conversation. She ignored him. I felt a perverse satisfaction, but it mixed with sorrow. Satisfying my need for vindication cost her privacy, and her pain was real even if she caused it. One quiet morning as autumn edged into winter, she left a note on the counter. It was short. "I'm sorry. I need to go away for a while." There was no explanation, no pleading. Just those 3 words. She packed a bag and left. I wanted to follow her, to grab her hand and demand we work it out, but something in me had shifted. Watching her walk out the door felt like a re-siding of the house. The foundation had been exposed. I didn't know if I wanted her to come back. After she left, the posts didn't stop. People continued to dissect our story, debating the ethics of exposing infidelity, the moral calculus of forgiveness versus revenge in marriage. The phrase, "How I made my cheating wife famous for all the wrong reasons," began to buzz in my head like an accusation and a truth. Fame, I realized, didn't equal justice. It didn't heal. It amplified. It called attention to pain and sometimes made it artistic. It also made my wife a public figure in a way she never wanted. Months passed. The public attention cooled. Emily's absence made space for me to breathe and to consider what I truly wanted. I could have pursued legal action or public retribution. I could have used the story to humiliate her until her name became a cautionary tale. Instead, I chose another path. One that wasn't noble, necessarily, but honest. I continued to speak about my experience, to help others who had been betrayed, without sacrificing the dignity of the people involved. I set boundaries with the media. I refused offers that would sensationalize our pain for clicks. If you're still listening, hit subscribe for more real-life, emotional relationship story narrations like this one, stories that dig into betrayal and heartbreak, and the messy choices we make. And yet, even with my attempts at restraint, making the story public had consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. Emily's family felt betrayed by me. Friends questioned my motives. Strangers assumed they knew the truth. In private moments, waves of regret would wash over me, regret not for revealing the truth but for the ways in which that truth changed the lives of people around us. The moral lesson was painful and simple. There is power in telling your story, but power can be a blunt instrument. I found myself in the strange position of being both the aggrieved husband and the architect of his own retaliation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wanted to be a man of principle, open, honest, compassionate, but human emotions are messy. The more I tried to control the narrative, the less I felt in control of the consequences. As winter settled in, I got a message from Emily. It was short and measured, nothing melodramatic. "Can we talk?" she wrote. Something in me tightened, the old hope, the old fear. I wanted closure. I wanted reconciliation. I wanted her to truly understand the consequences of what she'd done. Mostly, I wanted to know whether she changed. I answered, yes. We met in a public place, a small diner where the coffee was strong and the booths were vinyl. We sat across from each other like strangers who shared a past. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then she looked up and said, "I read everything. I read the comments. I read what people said about me. I'm sorry." Her apology was different this time, smaller, humbler, as if she knew words alone were cheap. She talked about how being exposed had forced her to face the reflection she'd been avoiding. She spoke of guilt, of therapy, of the desire to fix what she had broken, not because she was trying to save face but because she was beginning to understand the architecture of her choices. I listened. I nodded. I shared my pain. We spoke about trust as a currency you both earn and spend. We talked about the dangerous allure of revenge on cheating spouse, how it can feel satisfying initially but hollow later. We debated the ethics of exposure. We acknowledged how public our private had become. When we left the diner, nothing had been resolved. But something had shifted, not a big reconciliation, not a neat ending, but a recalibration. We both realized that whether we stayed together or parted ways, we had to live honestly. Revenge had been tempting. Making her famous for the wrong reasons had been a terrible form of justice. But our shared humanity demanded more than spectacle. Comment below, what would you do in my shoes? Is exposing the truth publicly ever justified, or does it cross a line? I read every comment, and I'll respond to a few. I sat in the quiet living room, the glow of my laptop screen lighting my face. The video was already edited, the title bold, raw, and direct. How my cheating wife ruined our 7-year marriage. I hovered over the publish button, my heart pounding in my chest. For days I debated whether I should do it. Was this revenge, or was this my only way of reclaiming my voice? She had taken my marriage, my peace, my trust, and turned them into ashes. Why shouldn't I tell the truth? Why should I suffer in silence while she lived without consequence? I clicked. Within minutes, comments began flooding in. Man, stay strong. She doesn't deserve you. This is one of the most shocking real-life cheating stories I've ever heard. And then, the subscribers started climbing. People related to the pain. Some had lived it. Some were in it right now. I wasn't alone anymore. But of course, the video didn't stay online quietly. By the next morning, my phone was exploding with messages. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives, all asking if the story was true. And then, inevitably, my wife, ex-wife by then, called. Her voice was trembling with rage. How dare you put this online? You've ruined me. I laughed bitterly. You ruined us first. This is the reality of what you did. If you didn't want to be known as a cheating wife, maybe you shouldn't have become one. Her silence on the line was almost satisfying. She tried to argue, threatened lawsuits, begged me to take it down, but the damage was done. Screenshots, downloads, reactions, it had already spread. She was famous, but not for the reasons she ever dreamed of. And in a strange twist of fate, I became known as the guy who turned his betrayal and heartbreak into a story people couldn't stop watching. My subscribers grew, my inbox filled with people sharing their own broken marriage drama, their own cheating spouse stories. Suddenly, my pain had a purpose. It connected me to strangers across the world who whispered, "Me too." Still, late at night, the loneliness hit me. The empty side of the bed. The quiet mornings without her making coffee. Forgiveness versus revenge in marriage. It's a line I wrestled with. Did I take revenge? Yes. Did it heal me? Partially. But forgiveness, that was harder. Sometimes I replayed flashbacks in my head, her smile on our wedding day, the way she used to squeeze my hand when she was nervous, the way I thought we'd be forever. And then I'd hear her whisper to another man in those late-night texts, the lies she told, the betrayal she so carefully crafted. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it doesn't mend, it shatters into 1,000 invisible pieces you keep stepping on, no matter how carefully you move forward. Months passed. Life moved on. I started new routines, built new friendships, worked on myself. But the story lived forever online. It wasn't just content, it was a piece of my heart, immortalized in pixels and sound. People still commented daily. Man, this story broke me. Thanks for sharing, I thought I was alone. Your pain gave me strength. One evening, sitting alone with a cup of tea, I realized something profound. She had taken so much from me, but unintentionally, she had also given me something. She gave me a voice. A platform. A way to turn my darkest heartbreak into a guiding light for others. Would I ever forgive her? Maybe. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook, it's about releasing the weight you carry. And so, if you're still listening right now, here's my message. If you've been betrayed, if you've felt the sting of broken trust, know this: your story isn't the end. Betrayal is painful, yes, but it can also be the beginning of something unexpected. Don't let it define you. Let it shape you. And if you're still here with me, don't forget to like this video. Comment below, what would you do if you were in my place? Would you choose forgiveness or revenge? And subscribe for more shocking, emotional relationship stories that dive deep into the human heart. As for me, My cheating wife became famous for all the wrong reasons. But me? I became stronger. And that, my friends, is the real ending.